Father, we just pray as the pastor preaches, just use him in a mighty way. We just thank you, Father, for just your love, your grace, and your mercy towards us. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. 644. Springs of living water. And pray over it. Amen.
There you go, buddy.
blessing song tonight. And because it's our blessing song, we'll have to sit. 427. Sweet by and by. We'll sing verse 2 and we'll take some blessings. There's a land that is fairer than day, and by faith we can see it afar. For the Father waits over the way, and prepared us a dwelling place there. In the sweet by and by, we'll meet on that beautiful shore. In the sweet by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore. We shall sing on that beautiful shore the melodious songs of the land, and the spirits shall sorrow no more, and the sign for our blessing and rest. In the sweet by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore. In the sweet by and by. Blessings. Yeah.
Sin. And in the answer prayer is we got my mom's visa, so just 10 days was released, so very happy with that. Quicker. Yeah, October in the family camp, so yeah. Thank you so much for the prayer.
Any more blessings?
I got my job that I wanted, which was great. This one.
Yeah. You start that
Tomorrow,
tomorrow.
Penske.
When my truck breaks down, I can come to you. Right, no, that's good. Well done. All right, we'll sing the last one. To our bountiful Father above, we will offer a tribute of praise for the glorious gift of His love, and His will of hallowed days. In the sweet by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore. In the sweet by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore. Any more blessings?
Call. Connor. Mic doesn't work. It's an absolute massive blessing, everybody that's been working hard in the city. Just really appreciate that. I left, well, thinking I was gone for 3 weeks, but just that for the last few months, everything's just gone as normal. And I know it's a massive sacrifice, and you get tired going in and tired with, feels like there's 10 church services a week by the end of the week, and then it starts all over again. So it's a big sacrifice, but God sees the effort and sees the sacrifice, hears the prayers, and God is blessing. People are still coming, and to hear that there's visitors and stuff like that every week, just a huge blessing. So thank you to everybody, and really, really appreciate it. Looking forward to getting in there tomorrow night as well, getting back into the swing of things.
what has happened to our Sunday nights? I noticed the same thing. It's losing its things, but yeah. All right. Man. I meant it this morning. Like, Sunday nights used to be the busiest. Legitimately used to be the busiest. And now, mind you, that was 10 or 12 years, 13, 14 years ago, and that was 2 churches on a Sunday night were coming back together on a Sunday evening. But yeah, man, people used to come back on a Sunday night, and not good. Do you know what? In all honesty, 3 out of the 4 churches in America shrunk. Every church that I was in had shrunk since I'd been there in 2010. Southwest used to run 21, and they were only running 1,700, but I mean, there's 400 people that less in 10 years. Inglewood was down to about 150, down from like 250 and things like that, for one reason or another. The worst was Liberty, where I was at, was running 300 to 350, and they were probably running 65 or 70 people. It was strikingly different to how it was when I was there. The church, though, in saying that, do you know what? Ben's church, the Spanish church, leaps and bounds going forwards. They are growing and growing and growing, and I think they have about 150 on their Sunday mornings when they're all there, and with great outreach, so great impact. So Western white people, for want of a better way of describing it, man, the hearts of people towards the things of God is getting cold and dark. And it's always been hard. There's never an excuse to stop and do whatever. It's always been difficult. It's never been a time. Even when you think the halcyon days of the 1800s and missionaries and this and people were getting saved and whatever. Do you know what? If we could get a time machine and go back then, you realise, man, it was hard back then. And if you go back to the 1950s and 60s and 70s and 80s, which were good years and good decades up until the 80s, you know what, they'd say, well, it was hard back then as well. And there's nothing changed, it's hard. God is still in this thing of saving souls, business of saving souls. Just, man, I think we might need more prayer and more whatever, something here, because the heart to get revived, to be serious about the things of God. People are still coming through, trickling through in the city. All right, Genesis chapter number 16. Genesis chapter number 16. May be applicable tonight. May be applicable to what we just discussed just then. Genesis 16. Read the entire chapter, 16 verses. Verse 1 says, Now Sarai, Abraham's wife, bare him no children, and she had no handmaid, and she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said unto Abram, Behold now, the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai. And Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. And he went unto Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. And Sarai said unto Abraham, My wrong be upon thee. I have given my maid into thy bosom. And when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between me and thee. But Abram said unto Sarai, Behold, thy maid is in thy hand, do to her as it pleaseth thee. And Sarai dwelt hardly with her, and she fled from her face. And the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain in the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarah's maid, whence camest thou, and whither wilt thou go? And she said, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarai. Sarai. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Return to thy mistress, and submit thyself under her hands. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, and it shall not be numbered for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shalt call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. And he will be a wild man, his hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. And she called the name of the Lord that spake unto her, Thou God seest me. For she said, Have I also looked after him that seeth me? Wherefore the well was called Beer Lahairoi. Behold, it is between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bare Abram a son, and Abram called his son's name, which Hagar bare, Ishmael. And Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bare Ishmael to Abram. It's an interesting passage again, and one that maybe you've read before. I'm not going to go in the typical way. Normally when I've heard this preached in here, or it's usually in the sense of the Jews and the Arabs, that these are two great warring conflicts, that even to this day, the animosity between the Arabs and the Jews still is at fever pitch after so many millenniums, really. And it comes out of this particular passage. It comes out of Ishmael, who then goes and has 7 sons, all of them princes, which are really the father of the Arab nations. Saudi Arabia and such like that come out of Ishmael. And you have Jacob, though, who later comes out of Isaac and out of Jacob, and then Israel, and then you have the 12 sons. So you have the 12 sons of Ishmael, which create the Arab nations, and the 12 sons of Jacob, which create Israel. And these two sibling rivalries is what we see today in our world, this great animosity. I'm going to not go down that path necessarily prophetically, but to look at this story for as it is. The story of Abraham is a man of faith, and his life and his ministry and his whole journey is a life of faith. And it's the ups and downs of a life of faith and the twists and turns. But one thing I love about the story of Abraham, not that I love his failures, but if Abraham fails in his faith, we can realize that, man, we need to be careful not to fail in our faith. And he's failed a few times. As much as he is held up as a great man of faith, and he follows God from the Ur of the Chaldees all the way to Syria, and then from Syria down into Israel, into a promised land, that he lived in a tent, and just the promise of a city that not built by God, not built by man's hands. He lived those promises, and though he never saw those promises fulfilled, and he lived in somewhat of an isolated state. But we also find him heading down to Egypt. As soon as famine comes, as soon as hard times come, that he went down into Egypt and at the time of famine. But it was his own lack of faith that sent him down into Egypt. He didn't go there boldly declaring, God has sent me down into Egypt. No, he was fleeing a famine at the first sign of heat and distress and difficulties. He goes down there into Egypt, and the mess that came about as a result of that. And then he said, this is not my wife, this is my sister. And then Pharaoh saw his wife, and he wanted to take Sarah as his wife, and the Lord plagued Pharaoh. Just the mess that came about because Abraham took the situation of a famine and lived in the flesh instead of by faith. Instead of asking God, he went by his own feelings and thoughts, and went down there. And he went down into Egypt, and not that long after, he turns around and comes back up. But out of that journey, out of unbelief and a lack of faith in that decision to go down to Egypt, he returns. But like all of our journeys, when we step away from God, it's not just a moment in time where we are living in a moment of unbelief. But oftentimes the consequences of those times and those seasons where we are living in unbelief go beyond that particular season. Seeds are sown during that time of unbelief that do bring forth a harvest. And Hagar seems to be one of those seeds that were sown, in the sense that she is an Egyptian handmaid to Sarah. Well, the time that they were in Egypt was when he was in unbelief, and when he was trying to handle things in the flesh, and he goes down there into Egypt and more than likely ends up with this handmaid at that particular time, and so now Hagar is there. Now, that's Abraham's lack of faith, and he leads his family, but this is really Sarah's lack of faith. Sarah is mentioned here, and this is not Sarah's or Sarai, this particular name, time that she is called. She's not yet changed the name to Sarah as Abram changed to Abraham. But Sarah, let's call her Sarah because it's easier to say, this is not what she wants to put on her epitaph. This is not what wants to put on her tombstone, this particular chapter in her life. Everything about this is that Sarah bare him no children, and she had a handmaid. Verse 2, Sarah said unto Abraham, Behold, the Lord hath restrained me from bearing, and so go in unto my maid, that I may obtain children by her. So surrogacy is what's taking place here, in a sense. All right, you go in unto my maid, you take her, Hagar, as your wife, and you have child with her, and then I will have the child, and the child will be mine. So she is, in a sense, using Hagar to be a surrogate which is a replacement. This is what a surrogate is. It's a replacement. It's a substitute for. And so she, in her impatience towards the promises of God, puts in a surrogate in place of the promise of God to get a child that she hopes to have in her hand and say, well, this will be the promise. This will be my child that I have, but via Hagar. Sarah is the one who came up with this idea. Sarah is the one that is enacting this. Sarah is the one who proposed it. And though Abraham went along with it, Sarah is all over this story. And Abraham, it says in verse 2, Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarah. This is Sarah's plan, to get a child into her arms via Hagar. And so Abram took Hagar, and she conceived. And verse 4 says that and when she saw that she had conceived, this is Hagar. When Hagar sees that she is conceived and she realizes that she is with child, her mistress, which is Sarah, was despised in her eyes. So as soon as she found out that she was conceived and she had a child, then she treated her mistress, Sarah, very poorly. And she now was like, who are you to tell me anything? I am with child by Abraham, and this will be my child, not yours. And so she starts treating Sarah really poorly. And she was despised. She despised Sarah. Verse 5 says, Sarah said unto Abraham, my wrong be upon thee. Man, Sarah didn't want to take responsibility for it. She's like, Abraham, you need to own up to some of these problems as well. My wrong and this wrong needs to be on you, and you need to fix this problem. Man, could you place yourself for a moment into this situation between Abraham, Hagar, and Sarah, and a child that is coming in now via Hagar and Abraham's relationship? What do you think social life was like in the Abraham household during those times? Yeah, that would be peak viewing if Abraham's life was a documentary on Netflix and they were viewing it. Man, I'm telling you, this would be peak viewing. There was no doubt some very harsh words that were flying. The Bible tells us there's harsh words that are being said here. Hagar having harsh words to Sarah, Sarah having harsh words with Abraham, Abraham saying, trying to wash his hands of the situation. It's a mess everywhere you look. It's a mess is what has taken place. And where did this mess come from? Well, actually, if you go on a little bit further, the mess deepens because she says, my wrong be upon thee, Abraham. You allowed this to happen. I merely suggested it, and you've gone ahead with it, and she's blaming him. And once blaming starts to take place, you know people are in the flesh. This is the fault, they're the fault, he's the issue, she's the issue. And Sarah is saying, my wrong be upon thee, you're the one to blame in all of this. Though it was Sarah that came up with the whole idea and proposed it all and presented it all. I have given my maid, and I was despised in her eyes. The Lord judged between me and thee. But Abraham said unto Sarah, behold, thy maid is in thy hand. You do to her as she pleases you. Don't put me on this. Don't put me into this. And so the mess just continues, and he puts it back onto Sarah and says, she's your maid, you deal with her. And then there it says, and Sarah dealt hardly with her. She fled. So you can sense the deep resentment. You can sense the deep animosity. You can sense the conflict that is taking place here because of this situation. And Sarah deals even more harshly back to Hagar. Hagar, it seems, in all of this, you can sort of see the personality of Hagar. Hagar has a strong personality here, as much as she has been sold for whatever reason, and she is a handmaid, and whether she voluntarily went into that as a job or whether she was sold as a slave because of past misdemeanors and things that she was paying off debts, whatever the situation is, her personality comes out, and as much as she was somewhat submissive while she was the maid, as soon as her rank elevated to be that of a wife and now with child, meant she straight away, the changes that came about in her and how she spoke now to Sarah changed, and then when she was spoken harshly to, it's like there's full of emotions in Hagar. Does that remind you of anybody in Hagar's life that also was full of emotion? Does anybody know anything about her son? Ishmael. You know what the sort of son Ishmael was? A wild man. His hand was against every man, and every man was against him. So maybe that sort of personality came from the mother's side, and Hagar sort of has a personality here that sort of comes out fleetingly in this story, where she has a lot of spirit within her. Ishmael has a lot of spirit within him, and he's a wild child. And so she flees and she runs away. Well, where do you think she runs to? She is in the wilderness at this time when she sees it. Where do you think she's heading? Where's she from? Egypt. Where do you think she's heading back? I have nowhere to go. There's nothing back for me in Egypt, but I can't stay there and I can't be there. I've got to go somewhere. And so she's sort of caught between two worlds. And Hagar flees in this moment. And then as she flees, verse number 7 says, "And the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain in the way of Shur." Shur is in the lower part of the wilderness. It's in the south part. It's on the eastern extremity of Egypt. She is heading south. She is fleeing away back down to where she knows, back to the land of Egypt is where she's running to. And the angel of the Lord found her. I don't know what comes to your mind when you think of the angel of the Lord, whether you think an angel came on behalf of the Lord. I want to give to you something maybe that you haven't thought about. And there is a phrase that's used again and again in the Old Testament, the angel of the Lord. There is a very real possibility that she didn't just meet an angel, that she met Jesus Christ himself. That's a big thing to say, isn't it? But the angel of the Lord phrase is often used, and the way that it's used in the Old Testament isn't just about any old angel showing up, but rather the character traits represent deity. Let me just hold your place here. Go to Exodus. Go to Exodus, chapter number 3. Hold your place there in Genesis, Exodus chapter number 3. Just over a couple of pages. Do you know what's in Exodus chapter number 3? Yes, that's true. It is true. But you know what else is in Exodus chapter number 3? The burning bush. Well, so what's the burning bush? I don't remember. Does anybody remember an angel in the burning bush? Well, let's have a look at chapter number 3, what Exodus says in chapter number 3, verse 1. "Now Moses kept the flock in Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the backside of the desert and came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush." Now, who speaks to Moses? Who is in the burning bush? God is in the bush. God speaks to Moses. He speaks to him and says, "And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed." And Moses says, "I will get thee now aside and see this great sight, why this bush is not burnt." And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush and said, "Moses, Moses." And he said, "Here am I." And he said, "Draw not nigh hither, put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground." that angel of the Lord that is calling unto Moses is God himself. Deity is calling to him, and he says, you are on holy ground. Take off your shoes. And it's the angel of the Lord that is in that burning bush calling to him, which is God. So there is reference to this. Go over to Joshua. Joshua chapter number 5. Joshua chapter number 5. Joshua chapter number 5. Verse 10 of chapter 5. And the children of Israel encamped in Gilgal and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month. And they did eat of the old corn of the land on the morrow after the Passover, unleavened cakes and parched corn on the selfsame day. And the manna ceased on the morrow after they had eaten of the old corn of the land. Neither had the children of Israel manna any more, but they did eat of the fruit of the land of Canaan that year. And it came to pass, when Joshua was by Jericho, that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there stood a man over against him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went unto him, and he said unto him, Art thou for us or for our adversaries? And he said, Nay, but as captain of the Lord am I now come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth, and did worship, and said unto him, What saith my Lord unto his servant? And the captain of the Lord's host said unto Joshua, Loose thy shoes from off thy foot, for the place whereon thou standest is holy. And Joshua did so. Joshua meets a man. Joshua meets someone that looks like just another man, but as he meets him with the man with his sword drawn, he says, Who are you? You're for us or you against us? He says, I am the captain of the Lord's host. And he says, and Joshua falls down and worships him. Angels don't receive worship, but Joshua worships this individual that comes in the presence as a man. And Joshua falls down and worships him. And as he's worshiping, he says, Loose thy shoes, you're on holy ground. Who does that sound like? It's Moses. God said the same thing to Moses. So who actually is Joshua in a confrontation with? Not a confrontation, but who is he actually in the presence of? Well, it would seem that it's not merely an angel, it's not merely a man, it is what's known as a Christophany. A Christophany is Jesus Christ an appearance of Jesus Christ in the Old Testament. And so he is in the presence of Jesus Christ, it would seem. For Christ never came into existence at Nazareth, at Bethlehem. He is the pre-existent one, the eternal, from eternity past to eternity future. That's Jesus. And so in the Old Testament, he shows up at different times. One of them as the angel of the Lord and the burning bush. One of them to Joshua as the captain. The captain meets his captain there in this particular story. Gideon has this same experience. Look at Judges, just in the same order. Just turn over a few pages. Joshua, Judges chapter number 6. Judges chapter number 6. And verse number 21 says, Then the angel of the Lord put forth the end of the staff that was in the hand and touched the flesh and the unleavened cakes, and there rose up fire out of the rock and consumed the flesh and the unleavened cakes. Then the angel of the Lord departed out of his sight. The offering that Gideon presented before God was received by the angel of the Lord. And then 22 says, And Gideon perceived that he was an angel of the Lord. Gideon said, Alas, O Lord God, for I have seen an angel of the Lord face to face. And the Lord said unto him, Peace be unto thee. Fear not, thou shalt not die. Then Gideon built an altar there unto the Lord and called it Jehovah Shalom, the God of peace. That's the name that after Gideon's experience with the angel of the Lord, he then calls the place Jehovah Shalom. It's the presence of God. Go to Zechariah chapter number 3, last one of these. Zechariah chapter number 3, all the way to the back. Zechariah chapter number 3. We're not yet there on a Wednesday night looking at the chapters, but Zechariah chapter number 3. Verse number 1 says, "And he showed me Joshua the high priest standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing at his right hand to resist him. And the Lord said unto Satan, The Lord rebuke thee, O Satan, even the Lord that hath chosen Jerusalem rebuke thee. Is not this a brand plucked out of the fire?" Joshua is the high priest. Joshua is standing before God, offering up sacrifices to God on behalf of the people, doing his priestly job. And as he is there, it says that he is standing before the angel of the Lord. That, I would again think that pictures God himself, deity. He is offering up sacrifices before God. Satan is at his right hand to hinder and to stop the work of the sacrifices being made there. But he is referred to as the angel of the Lord. Now, when we come back to the story of Hagar, we have this interesting observation. The angel of the Lord found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness. Does that remind you of any other stories in the book of John? The lady at the well, the woman of Samaria. It's almost like a precursor to that story. For here is this woman at the well, and Jesus, in his incarnation, he goes and finds the woman at the well, and she is there alone, and Jesus comes to her, and he goes to find the lost sheep that's in the wilderness, those same stories of the Good Shepherd. Here he is showing up to Hagar as she flees and runs. And out of all of that mess of the flesh that took place in the first parts of the chapter, it's God who shows up to put his influence into the situation that had been taking place. And he says, "Hagar, Sarah's maid, whence camest thou, and whither wilt thou go?" And she said, "I flee from the face of my mistress. I know where I'm coming from, but I don't really know where I'm going." Such was the confusion of her life. You ever got to a place in life where because of the circumstances of life you can say, "I know where I've come from, but I don't know where I'm going"? I've been there. I've been to those places where you can say categorically, "I know where I've come from, but I don't know where I'm going," because of the circumstances. And that's where Hagar is. She says, "I know where I've come from, but I don't know where I'm going. I flee from the face of my mistress, and I'm sort of heading in the direction of Egypt reluctantly." And the angel of the Lord said unto her, "Return to thy mistress and submit thyself unto her hands." Go back, Hagar, go back. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, "I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude." And the angel of the Lord said unto her, "Behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shalt call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction." He heard it. Is she a praying woman here? Is there a mention of the prayer? No, God heard the anguish and cry of her heart. And in the anguish and the cry of her heart, God meets her in the hidden places of a wilderness. God sees. And look what she says. Verse 12. Well, he says, "And he will be a wild man, and his hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren." Hagar, your son is going to be somewhat similar to you, quite passionate and emotional. And he is going to be a wild man. And not that the Arabs, if you meet the Arabs, they're passionate people. They're passionate individuals about the things in life. Verse 13 says, they don't have in Arabic, I don't think there's a phrase in Arabic that says, "She'll be right, mate." We have it in our culture because we are not always passionate and we are not always uptight. We're laid back and kicked back in Australia. But the Arabs, no. They're serious. And the Jews, the same. Serious people. And she says this in verse 13, "And she called the name of the Lord that spake unto her." Who spake unto her? The Lord. She acknowledges and realizes, the Lord spake unto me here. God is speaking with me. And she calls it, Thou God seest me. El Roha, the God that sees. She says, this thou God seest me. And God is a God that sees. He sees everything. This is the omniscience of God, the omnipresence of God, rather, that He is in all places beholding the evil and the good. Does not David, the psalmist, say that if I make my bed in hell, lo, He is there. If I ascend up to the stars, lo, He is there. If we were to go to the far-flung places of the planet, God is there. And here in the wilderness where Hagar is by herself, she acknowledges God is there, and He sees, and He knows. And wherever you may be in life, you may think, nobody knows. Isn't that the song? Nobody knows the trouble I see. But you know what? That's not true. Because God sees. He sees the anguish of your heart. He knows what you're going through. He knows not just you and your externals. He knows the innermost thoughts and intents of your life. God sees your afflictions. He sees your sorrows and He knows you. And He shows up to Hagar to say, I have seen your affliction. And Hagar says, Thou God seest me. For she said, Have I also here looked after him that seeth me? She's saying this, have I really sought God like He has sought me? And she is amazed. Having been out of Egypt and the gods of Egypt, she has spent her time in Abraham, and she has spent her time in the house of Abraham, and he no doubt is worshipping God on a daily basis, and she sees him worshipping God, but she herself may have not at this stage yet worshipped God herself. And she is amazed that God would seek her, though she has never sought Him. Do you know, can you see your own salvation in this? That He loved us when? While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. He sought us ever before we ever really sought Him. He sought us, and He seeks us. And He came to seek and to save. He seeks us. He is a God who sees our afflictions and sees our needs and sees our heartaches. And He has sought us for salvation. And she is saying, have I here looked after Him? Have I sought Him have I looked for Him like He has looked for me? No, He has been more faithful to me than I have been to Him. Can anybody here testify tonight and say, you know what, my God has been more faithful to me than I've ever been to Him? I know it. I know it. He's been more faithful to us than we have ever been to Him. And verse 14 says, Wherefore the well was called Beer Lahairoi. Behold, it is between Kadesh and Bered. And she bare the son, and she went back, and she bare Ishmael to it. But God sees Hagar. God sees her afflictions, sees the heartaches, and sees the hurts, and knows it all together, the situation. And He Himself came to it. And how did this whole situation come about? Sure, God intervenes, and God blesses where the blessings weren't deserved. But where did the problem arise from? The problem arose from this, impatience. Impatience with the promises of God. Abraham lived in the flesh when he went down to Egypt. Sarah lives in the flesh here by being impatient with the promises of God. That one thing about the promises of God that we are told again and again is to be patient. And they with patience will receive them. But it's via patience and long suffering. God is not always just straight away. Sometimes His promises are long tarrying and seem to go on for a long time. In fact, this was 10 years that He was in the land. 10 years had gone by They thought, man, this is just long enough. 10 years is long enough. We have to do something. We've become impatient with God, therefore we look to the world to try and fix the issues. What she did, she went to an Egyptian, a picture of the world. And she turned away. God has not bearing me children, and I will have children via Hagar. And we have become impatient with God, and we go to the world to fix the issues and the problems that arise from that. Let me encourage you tonight, whatever you are in life and whatever that God has promised, may I encourage you to be patient with God and not to become impatient with him. And though he tarry, wait. And though he bear long, wait. Even 10 years, wait. And wait for God. He will be faithful. He will be true to his promise. I don't have time to go here tonight, and I've gone past the point where I should have raised it, but I'll raise it just in passing. Do you know what we also see in this story with Sarah? There's two people here, Abraham and Sarah, trying to conceive, and they are unable to conceive. But we learn here that the issue wasn't with Abraham from a natural perspective. It's with Sarah. Sarah couldn't conceive. And so you find this Sarah is the one. This whole chapter is about Sarah, or the first part of it is about Sarah and how she tries to deal with the situation, and maybe realizing that the issue is with her, and maybe realizing it's the lack of the promise, as she has a part to play in the promise not coming forth, and the pressure and the lack of just the unbelief that sunk into her heart at those times. And there's a whole things that weighed in her mind that led her to that decision. But have patience with God in his promises. Though he tarry, wait. Though he tarry, wait. And know this, God sees Hagar. God saw Hagar. He is the God who sees. The God who sees. Let's bow our heads and hearts before him before we close in a song tonight.